90% effective, 8 out of 10 Filipinos already believe that a shot will be available next year. Is the pandemic's end finally in sight? Seems like it for the US's top infectious disease expert. Researchers also note a decline in COVID-19's fatality rate. We begin tonight with Typhoon Ulysses leaving scores dead after it pummeled a huge area of Luzon. There are, however, discrepancies in the tally. Official data from the NDRRMC puts the death toll to at least 12. 6 of the casualties were reported in Region 2, 5 in the Bicol region, and 1 in the Cordillera region. The NDRRMC said they are still validating casualty reports in NCR. But as will be reported later on in the broadcast, several local governments are already reporting more deaths. Some agencies, in fact, have disparate figures. Interior Secretary Ed Año said death toll has risen to 14, while PNP Chief Deboldcina said there are 26 fatalities so far. AFP Chief Gilbert Gapay reported that 39 bodies have so far been recovered by the NDRRMC Rescue and Retrieval Cluster, which he heads. Año clarified that the data still needs to be verified and that the official death toll could still climb further in the coming days.
Yung reported na recovery ng cadavers, we still have to validate that kasi yung iba dyan baka naman hindi typhoon related. No? We will provide you the validated figures later on.
The NDRRMC also reports that 8 individuals were injured due to Ulysses while 14 remain missing. A total of 105 cities or municipalities were flooded, with some 65,000 families preemptively evacuated.
Maganda yung ating response dito dahil bago pa man dumating yung bagyo ay naka-alerto na yung ating mga NDRRMC, OCD sa lahat ng mga region na tatamaan ng bagyo.
In an interview on Radyo 5, DPWH Undersecretary Ana May Lamentillo also reported that 74 roads across 9 regions were initially affected by the typhoon. But this was brought down to 49 after the agency conducted clearing operations. Marikina City has declared a state of calamity to help residents recover from the typhoon. It's now cleanup time for those who have returned from evacuation centers. Now to tell us more, Mean Los Baños joins us from Marikina. Mean, how are residents holding up?
Many of the evacuees here in Marikina have started going home as floods due to Typhoon Ulysses have already receded. The residents are now facing the daunting task of scraping off thick mud and trash in their houses. Floodwaters surrounded almost all barangays here in Marikina. Residents are trying to save what they can from their soaked appliances and furniture. M.A. Villaruel could not help but cry as they lost all their hard-earned belongings. Even the modules, laptop, and tablets used by their 2 kids in school were soaked in water.
Kaya kagabi pa talaga, kahapon pa ako iyak na iyak. Kasi kahit yung mga gamit namin, nakaligtas kami pero kahit paano yung mga gamit namin, pinundar namin ng mag-asawa, naubos.
MA recounts how they had to rush out of their house after the perimeter dike near their house collapsed. The strong current from the dike also resulted in the death of a 33-year-old man. The walls at the back portion of their house fell during the onslaught of Ulysses on Thursday. It was only on Friday that rescuers were able to retrieve his body.
Ka-text pa ng utol ko na kumusta kasi para lumikas. Kasi yun nga, may bagyo tayo. Nag-oo naman siya kaso sinabihan pa nga yung isang utol ko na di baling mga gamit mawala basta yung buhay may salba. Hindi nagulat na lang kami na baliktad ang nangyari. Kaya ano talaga, masakit sa amin na nawala siya.
Another survivor recounts her experience. Minda Pingol is now cleaning up trash in their house after the flood reached second floor. She gets emotional since even their family pictures and other memorabilia were not spared.
Wala nga rescue. Wala nga rescue. Ano na kami? Nag-start kami ng hingi. Lahat yata tinawagan, pati Malacanang ng ko eh. Tapos, wala talaga. So, dinadaan-daanan lang kami, di ba? Kung nakita mo yun, dumadaan lang sa amin. Babalikan na lang namin kayo.
Minda was already living in Provident when Ondoy happened in 2009, but she believes Ulysses is much worse. Mayor Marcy Chodoro says the rehabilitation efforts may take a few weeks. He warns that the economic effects will be felt in the next 5 to 10 years. That is why he opted to declare a state of calamity to help residents apply for loans with the help of government agencies like SSS, GSIS, and Pag-ibig.
Nag-declare ako ng state of calamity para makapag-file ulit sila ng emergency loan, calamity loan, housing loan.
Robbie, the water level at the Marikina River is now down to 14.3 meters, which is far from yesterday's 22-meter high. Of the 30 to 40,000 residents evacuated, around 13,000 remain in the evacuation centers as of now.
Thank you, Mel Baños, reporting from Marikina. The aftermath of Typhoon Ulysses has raised discussions over the age-old problem of flooding in Metro Manila, particularly in Marikina City. Experts give their 2 cents on what went wrong and what could be done. Patricia Mangune reports.
The city of Marikina saw devastating flood once again due to Typhoon Ulysses. But urban planning expert architect June Palafox is no longer surprised. This after the government failed to implement the 1976 Land Development Plan for Metro Manila. It was an interagency blueprint crafted by the Department of Public Works and Highways, Department of Transportation, and the National Economic Development Authority or NEDA. The 43-year-old plan identifies Marikina Valley as a hazard-prone area due to flooding from the Marikina River and earthquakes due to its location at the West Valley Fault. Palafox said establishments and houses should have been prohibited from being built in Marikina in the first place.
Kaya, yung mga nag-approve ng permits na yan, kung nabasa nila yung mga recommendation 1975, 1976, especially Metro Plan Manila, hindi nasunod yung mga rekomendasyon.
Palafox said he submitted recommendations to the office of then-President Noynoy Aquino to solve the flooding, but they were not given much attention.
All the hazards, including earthquakes, landslides, but pinakamarami sa long-term, medium-term, pinakamarami sa flooding kasi I started writing this after Ondoy, then after Yolanda.
Palafox warned that until the government moves to correct the decades-old urban planning blunder, residents will have to endure constant flooding. Environmental planner architect Paulo Alcazaren believes local governments should allot open spaces in cities and municipalities for plants and trees to address flooding. He said this can be better enforced through legislation.
What we need is open green space to help absorb all of these flood waters. We used to have a lot of parks and open green space, but we have no opportunity to do that because no space is allocated. So what we need is a law.
For News 5, Patricia Mangune. We are One News.
Ulysses re-intensifies into a typhoon as it exits the Philippine area of responsibility. Pag-asa said that as of 3 p.m., Typhoon Ulysses was located 620 kilometers west of Iba, Zambales. It is moving westward at 25 kilometers per hour toward the central portion of Vietnam. The State Weather Bureau said Ulysses will likely maintain its strength in the next 12 hours, but will gradually weaken due to the northeast monsoon or hanging amihan. The tail end of a cold front will bring moderate to heavy rains in northern Luzon. We'll go for a quick break. When the big story returns. The Justice Department wants an NBI probe into the killing of a Manila trial court judge. Justice Secretary Menardo Guevara says the incident has implications on the welfare of judges. And majority of Filipinos are expecting a COVID-19 vaccine to be available in the next 12 months. More on that SWS survey when we come back. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. I'm Jess De Los Santos. Many residents in typhoon-hit Camarines Norte no longer have homes to return to. For the latest, Marian Enriquez joins us live from Daet. Marian, what's the latest from the provincial government?
Robbie, at least 5 casualties and 7 missing persons have been reported here in Camarines Norte, one of the hardest hit areas by Typhoon Ulysses. One barangay records 0 casualties, but almost all of the houses have been wiped out.
Dito po ma'am yung bahay namin. Tapos dinala po ng baha doon sa kampi dito. Kaya po papag namin ay na po sa bubong ng ibang bahay.
62-year-old Amelita could only watch as her house was swept away by flash floods. Using bamboo sticks and some tarpaulins, she and her husband built a makeshift shelter for their family of 8 here in Barangay Malibago, Labo Town. Amelita says words are not enough to express her grief.
Meron pa po akong apong inaalagaan. May kapatid pa akong PW. Saan po kami tutungo kundi magsikap?
She was able to save some of her family's belongings, but it's a different story for her neighbor Manilin, who was left with nothing.
Kahit po damit namin wala kaming naisalba. May nagbigay lang po kanina sa aming damit. Ubos na ubos po ang gamit namin.
More than 30 houses were washed away when the nearby river overflowed on Wednesday. Barangay Malibago seemed like a lake in these cell phone videos, where only the roofs of the houses can be seen. No casualties have been reported, but barangay officials admit the devastation was massive, something they did not expect. Mayor Joseph Ascutia says he is thankful that all residents in Malibago came out alive.
So at least walang namatay dito sa barangay na to. And we learned our lessons. So dapat hindi na ulit mangyari sa lugar na ito. Kaya nga sinasabi ko sa kanila, wag nang tumayo dito.
According to Ascutia, a permanent relocation is underway for nearly 1,000 residents in low-lying areas. Of the 5 casualties recorded by Camarines Norte, 3 were from the town of Labo. The Labo local government has started relief operations. On Saturday, the Office of Civil Defense will distribute relief packs and materials for makeshift shelters in the towns of Vinsons and Labo. The Camarines Norte PDRRMO says power lines in 50% of the households across the province have been restored.
Just for neighboring Camarines Sur, 4 casualties have been reported so far. 13 low-lying areas, particularly in the town of Milaor, are still submerged and need to waste deep flood waters. This as the town serves as a catch basin for nearby areas. Jess?
Maraming salamat, Marian Enriquez, reporting live from Camarines Norte. Now let's have a look at other provinces that saw damages from Typhoon Ulysses. In Quezon Province, residents of Infanta have started cleaning up after the disastrous flooding. Some tried to retrieve belongings that could still be of use. In General Nakar, where Ulysses made a 3rd landfall, damage is pegged at 17 million pesos, that's 7 million for agriculture and 10 million for infrastructure. In San Nicolas and Taal, Batangas, fissures that formed after the Taal volcano eruption last January widened following the onslaught of Typhoon Ulysses. In San Nicolas, the sinkholes reached up to 9 feet deep. Some 80 families living within a 5-meter radius from the fissures have been advised to evacuate. In Dasmariñas, Cavite, a warehouse facility collapsed at the height of the typhoon, trapping several construction workers and their families living near the site. 3 construction workers were rescued from the collapsed 50-foot warehouse building. The bodies of a couple and their 3-year-old child were also found under the rubble. Initial investigations pointed to saturated land following back-to-back typhoons. Meanwhile, 5 are dead, while 9 others are yet to be rescued after a landslide in a mining village in Nueva Vizcaya. Likewise, heavy rain from Typhoon Ulysses after a series of storms that hit the country is believed to have loosened the soil, causing the landslide. Ulysses is estimated to have resulted to 500 million losses in rice produce, with much of Bulacan's rice fields being inundated. Well, will this mean a shortage in rice supply? Laila Pangilinan tells us in this report.
Romulo was about to harvest rice yesterday until Typhoon Ulysses ravaged his house and fields in Bulacan. Their family had no choice but to consume the crops they were supposed to sell.
Eri pong palay na aming aanihin, wala na pong pag-asa to, kundi yung pagtsatsaga-tsaga na lang po. Dahil ho yan, nalubog na, umaasim po ang laman. Dahil sa mga bagyo na yan, imbis na gumandaan
He now sells palay for just 9 to 10 pesos a kilo. Wet ones go even cheaper.
Nagpabenta po ako ng 2 kaban. 900 pesos lang. Tuyo na yun tuyo na po. Hindi ho yung basang ganyan. 10 piso ang tuyo. Yung basa, 8 o 7 pa yan. Lao talaga, baksak na baksak ko. Lugi pa po sa gastos na.
Water reserve was made optimal in the affected areas prior to the recent spate of typhoons. But it was a little too late.
Agriculture was the most affected sector in the province of Bulacan when Typhoon Ulysses released its wrath yesterday in the province. 10 to 12,000 hectares of rice field remain submerged in water. But the Department of Agriculture says that this scenario could have been prevented.
The Agriculture Department said it will provide a 187 million peso seed and fertilizer assistance to Bulacan farmers, on top of donations and loans in the coming days. Secretary William Dar assured ample rice supply as buffer reserves is still at 94 days.
So nung nagkaroon na ng patubig, ito naman natamaan ng bagyo. In 2 weeks time nakikita ko pwede na anihin pero dapan na.
Dar also warned rice dealers and middlemen to not take advantage of the situation.
Rice is number 1 na na-damage itong Typhoon Ulysses. By now, nasa level na 500 million na. Considering these damages, mas malaki. Sinisiguro po natin na mayroon tayong sapat na inventaryo, may sapat na bigas ang bansa natin.
Bulacan Governor Daniel Fernando, for his part, vowed to utilize their LGU's budget in aid of the affected farmers.
Alam naman ninyo, nagpandemya, wala na, nilabas na natin lahat. But we manage the system, especially the financial, so kung paano tayo makakatugon. So may mga programang hindi naman nagawa, so pinarealign ko yun.
Fernando also vowed to provide his constituents with enough food and water supply. For News 5, Laila Pangilinan, we are One News.
These are the other big stories today. The Justice Department orders the NBI to launch a probe into the killing of Manila Regional Trial Court Judge Maria Teresa Abadilla. While the case appears to be an internal issue between Abadilla and her court clerk, DOJ Secretary Menardo Guevara said the killing calls for an investigation, as the incident has implications to the security of judges and justices. The Philippine Judges Association calls for sobriety while the investigation is ongoing. An SWS mobile phone survey shows that 80% of Filipinos are expecting a COVID-19 vaccine to be ready by next year. The survey was conducted late September, over a month before Pfizer announced that its experimental vaccine is 90% effective. 17%, meanwhile, are less optimistic. They don't see a vaccine being available in 12 months. 80% of Filipinos also believe that an effective COVID-19 medicine will be available in 2021. The Energy Department and PXP Energy Corporation are set to meet and discuss the latter's oil exploration plans in the West Philippine Sea. The DOE gave the firm a go signal to resume projects after the moratorium on exploration activities in the West Philippine Sea was lifted. PXP Energy has 2 service contracts involving Northwest Palawan Black and Recto Bank. Let's pause for a quick break. When we come back, Pag-asa says dams may need to release more water to prevent structural damage. Officials vow to prevent possible flooding. And citing improvements in patient care, scientists report a drop in COVID-19 death rate, with vaccine developments also showing promise. Are we seeing an end to the pandemic? The details when we return. Good evening, you're still watching The Big Story. I'm Jess De Los Santos. While some households are still reeling from floods caused by Ulysses, Pag-asa said dams will need to release some more water to prevent structural damage. Will this mean more flooding? Shaila Francisco tells us.
Flood water reached the roofs of the houses in Barangay Bagong Silangan, Quezon City on Thursday. While it subsided, residents are facing another problem, the lack of water supply. Macario, for one, has not finished cleaning his mud-filled house due to low water pressure.
Magtiis na lang kami mamaya siguro kung malinis na yung aming sahig, magtiis muna kami. No? Alam niyo naman kami mga matatanda na kailangan naman komportabling higaan. Kaya lang, wala na kaming choice, kundi magtiis na lang. Kasi walang tubig. Walang tubig.
Without enough supply of water, some of them say it would take at least a week for their houses to be habitable again. Maynilad says roughly 1 million households, or 70% of its customers, are facing rotational water interruptions. It explains that production in La Mesa plants had to be reduced due to high turbidity of water coming from the Ipo Dam.
More than times 3 yung dumi ng tubig na nakuha namin kahapon mula sa Ipo versus to sa historical maximum.
Customers of Manila Water in Marikina, Pasig and Rizal are also experiencing water interruption. In response, both concessionaires say water tankers have already been deployed to assist affected households. Meanwhile, Pag-asa says some dams will continue to release water due to excess supply brought by Typhoon Ulysses. The National Water Resources Board assures the public that they will mitigate possible flooding. Officials explain that the spilling operations are necessary to prevent infrastructure damage.
Dahil na po flooded na no yung area sa downstream, so ayaw ho nating itodo din no yung pag-spill no at para hindi na ma-aggravate lalo no yung impact ng mga pagbaha no doon sa downstream communities no. So yun po ang yung isa nating kino-consider.
They also clarified that the activity has no connection to the abrupt rise of flood water in Marikina City.
Walang epekto yung mga dam releases doon sa flooding na nangyari sa Marikina. Dahil yung tubig from Angat and Ipo Dam hindi po nakakarating sa Marikina.
Shaila Francisco, WR1 News.
The National Grid Corporation of the Philippines continues to assess transmission lines damaged by Typhoon Ulysses. The NGCP says of the 44 affected lines, 30 are now functional, while the remaining are still undergoing restoration. Efforts are likewise ongoing to restore power among Meralco customers. In its latest report, the power utility giant says 453,000 households are still without electricity. Meralco targets to restore power in these areas this weekend. However, spokesperson Joe Zaldarriaga admits the process could be tedious in hardest-hit areas.
Medyo mas babagal na yung restoration process. Dahil ang mangyayari dito, magkakalye-kalye na kami, bahay-bahay. At yan yung pinaka-tedious na process. It's been a difficult climb, but we're able to somehow manage to ensure that we will restore at the soonest possible.
In sports, the Premier Volleyball League just turned pro, the country's first ever volleyball tourney to do so. The PVL and the Games and Amusement Board made it official moments ago in an online press conference. The move comes on the heels of Chooks to Go, Pilipinas 3x3, the National Basketball League, and the Women's Basketball League all turning pro this year. The three-conference PBL will make a comeback in 2021 after the pandemic halted it. The Gilas Pilipinas, meanwhile, was given the green light to resume training for the 2021 FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers this month. The IATF allowed the national team to set up a bubble in Laguna before traveling to Bahrain next week. The death rate from COVID-19 has dropped by nearly a third since April as treatment and vaccine developments show promise. A University of Washington study showed that COVID-19 fatality rate is now at 0.6%, down from the 0.9% fatality rate during the onset of the pandemic. Researchers attributed this to improved patient care with the use of oxygen support as well as the identification of effective treatment options. U.S. infectious disease expert Anthony Fauci also believes COVID-19 won't stay a pandemic much longer with multiple prospects and vaccines. A Bloomberg report quoted him saying that all that's left to do is to double down on public health measures while waiting for the vaccines. Fauci's statement came after Pfizer reported that the vaccine they are developing is at least 90% effective. Findings on the clinical trial of another U.S. vaccine maker, Moderna, are expected soon. The world cheered Pfizer's good news that its COVID-19 vaccine candidate is 90% effective. But how exactly does their shot work? Let's find out in this video. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again on Monday at 8 p.m. on Signal Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. I'm Jess De Los Santos. We are One News. Good evening.